A lone figure slips through a moonlit forest, far from the well-trodden path. The famous pilgrim roads of medieval Europe were merely the surface of a much deeper and darker secret world. Beyond the official routes to Santiago and Rome lay a hidden network of trails used by heretics, fugitives, and treasure seekers. By the end of this journey, you will know the full story of these clandestine paths, from the escape routes of the hunted Cathars to the covert highways of the Knights Templar. What forbidden knowledge was carried on these roads, and what happened to those who vanished while seeking it? What does true devotion look like when it must be practiced in the shadows? A pilgrimage was the great adventure of the medieval soul, a journey that promised spiritual cleansing and a chance to touch the divine. Every year, countless souls left their homes, driven by faith, a vow, or a desperate hope for a miracle. But this sacred journey was also a perilous gauntlet. The roads, even the official ones, were infested with bandits who saw pilgrims not as holy travelers but as easy prey, carrying whatever coin or valuables they had to fund their long trek. Then there were the local lords, men who controlled the lands and the bridges, demanding exorbitant tolls from those who had no choice but to pass. And sometimes the greatest threat came from the very institution that promoted these journeys. The church itself was a labyrinth of political power, and a pilgrim with the wrong beliefs or from the wrong region could find themselves accused of heresy simply for traveling. So why would anyone take such a risk? For many, it was pure, unshakable devotion, but for others, the pilgrimage was a perfect disguise. It was the one reason you could give for traveling vast distances without raising suspicion. A heretic fleeing persecution could blend into the river of faithful souls. A spy could carry messages under the cloak of a penitent. A treasure hunter could seek lost relics or ancient knowledge, all while appearing to be just another soul seeking redemption. The sacred path became a screen for the most secretive of journeys, creating a hidden world within a world where true intentions were buried deep beneath a performance of piety. These official routes were the grand, public face of pilgrimage. The road to Santiago de Compostela, for instance, was a spiritual superhighway marked by churches, hostels, and bustling towns that catered to the faithful. But this visibility came with a price. Every step was watched. The church and local authorities monitored these roads, collecting taxes at bridges and city gates, ensuring that the flow of devotion also filled their coffers and reinforced their power. To walk the official path was to be seen, recorded, and controlled. Yet forking away from these well-lit avenues was another kind of path entirely. This was the underground network, a web of forgotten forest trails, treacherous mountain passes, and hidden river fords. These routes were not marked on any map available to the public. They were remembered in whispers and passed down in secret. Traveling them was an act of defiance. They functioned as a kind of medieval underground railroad, a lifeline for those who could not risk the public eye. A Cathar heretic fleeing the Inquisition's flames, a messenger carrying Templar secrets, a scholar transporting forbidden texts, all of these souls would choose the peril of the wild over the danger of the watched road. The choice was stark, freedom versus safety, but it was a freedom paved with fear. One wrong turn, one encounter with a patrol or a suspicious local could mean capture or a lonely death in the wilderness. This hidden world existed just beneath the surface of the official one, a desperate, silent current flowing against the tide of sanctioned faith. Among those who desperately needed the hidden roads, none were more hunted than the Cathars. This Christian sect, branded as heretics by the Pope, faced extermination during the brutal Albigensian Crusade. For them, the pilgrimage was not about devotion but survival. Their secret routes became ghost roads, etched not in stone but in desperation, winding through the very heart of the Pyrenees Mountains. These were not paths for the faint of heart. They were treacherous climbs over jagged rock, narrow ledges above dizzying drops, and icy river crossings that could sweep a person away in an instant. The journey itself was a test of faith as severe as any martyrdom. But where were they running? Their goal was relative safety, often in the more tolerant regions of Lombardy in northern Italy or Catalonia across the mountains in Spain. Yet reaching that sanctuary required a network of courage that stretched across the hostile landscape. High in the mountains stood the fortress of Montségur, the last great Cathar stronghold. Its fall in 1244 was a catastrophe, but from its ashes the ghost roads truly came to life. Fleeing survivors carrying their sacred knowledge slipped away from the smoldering ruins and into the forests, beginning their grim exodus. Their survival depended on a clandestine web of safe houses. These were often remote monasteries that secretly shared their beliefs, or small villages whose people risked everything to offer a hidden cellar, a loaf of bread, and a moment's rest. Most crucial were the guides, men and women who knew the mountain passes like the lines on their own hands. They were the keepers of the secret ways, leading groups under the cover of darkness or through thick mountain fog. They risked a fiery death alongside those they helped, their payment nothing but the knowledge that they had upheld a higher law. Can you hear the silence of those journeys? The crunch of gravel under a careful foot, the suppressed cough in the freezing air, the whispered prayer upon reaching a hidden door. This was not a grand pilgrimage for glory, but a silent, fearful march for the right to simply exist. Their footsteps left no permanent mark, yet they carved a hidden history into the very stone of the mountains, a testament to a faith that refused to be entirely erased. But if the Cathars were fleeing a crusade, the Knights Templar were escaping their own king. On Friday, the 13th of October, 1307, King Philip IV of France unleashed a devastating blow, ordering the simultaneous arrest of every Templar in the country on charges of heresy and blasphemy. In an instant, the most powerful military and financial organization in Europe was declared an enemy of the state. Its members were now fugitives, and its legendary treasure, a fortune accumulated over 2 centuries, became a prize every monarch desired. The official roads were suddenly a death trap lined with the king's men. Yet the Templars possessed something no other group could claim, a hidden map of Europe etched not on parchment, but in their own operational structure. For generations, they had built a clandestine empire within an empire. Their preceptories, which were local commanderies and estates, were not just fortresses and farms. They were way stations in a continent-spanning network, connected by private roads and secret sea lanes known only to their own sailors. This was not a network they had to create in their moment of crisis. It was one they had to activate. The theory suggests that in the days and weeks following the arrests, a silent alarm was sent through this hidden system. Key members, along with portions of their fabled wealth, began to move. They did not travel as knights in white mantles adorned with the Red Cross. They moved as merchants, as pilgrims, as anonymous travelers on the very roads they had once protected. Their network functioned like a medieval version of a dead drop system. A preceptory in the French countryside, seemingly abandoned, might have a cache of coins buried beneath the stable floor. A sympathetic ship captain, perhaps indebted to the Templar banking system, would wait for a specific signal on a remote Scottish shore. The routes they used were not arbitrary. They leveraged ancient tracks that predated Roman roads, paths forgotten by mainstream travel but remembered by the Templars through their extensive land holdings and cross-continental journeys. One major escape artery likely ran north from the heart of France towards the coast, and then across the Channel to Scotland, a kingdom that had excommunicated its king and was therefore beyond the Pope's immediate reach. Another may have swung south, through the Pyrenees into the relative safety of Portugal and Spain, where the order was simply rebranded and allowed to continue under a new name. But how do you move a treasure that legends say included the wealth of kings and perhaps even religious artifacts from Jerusalem itself? You do not move it in chests on a single wagon. You dissolve it. Gold and silver were melted down and reintroduced into the economy through their own banking contacts. smaller, priceless items, relics or documents would be smuggled in the belongings of a single trusted knight, his plain robes offering the perfect concealment. The labyrinth did not lead to a single destination. It branched out, dispersing men and secrets to the farthest, safest corners of the known world. The silence of their escape was so complete that the fate of the Templar treasure remains one of history's greatest mysteries, suggesting that their hidden roads were not just paths of flight, but the veins of a ghost that simply vanished into the landscape it knew so well. Even the most sacred road was not a single path. While thousands walked the main routes to Santiago de Compostela, a parallel system of secret trails branched off into the wilderness. These were the alternate caminos, forged not for convenience but for necessity. Pilgrims from France and beyond faced a daunting prospect: the long stretch through the Meseta, a vast, arid plateau under the control of Moorish kingdoms. While open warfare was rare, the threat of banditry or sudden political shifts was constant. To avoid this perilous territory, many chose a longer, harder journey along the northern coast of Spain. This path, tracing the rugged coastline of Galicia, was a route of mist and sea spray where pilgrims traded the scorching sun for the bite of the Atlantic wind. It was a desperate choice for some, a strategic one for others, all seeking to bypass the dangers of the interior. But avoiding hostile lands was only one reason to leave the main road. The official Camino was a river of humanity, and with that crowd came other kinds of danger. Petty thieves thrived in the chaos. More significantly, the church and local lords established toll booths at nearly every major river crossing and city gate. For a pilgrim with little money, these fees could mean the difference between reaching the saint's tomb and starving halfway there. The hidden paths offered a way to vanish, to escape both the financial burdens and the watchful eyes of authority. Finding these paths required a different kind of knowledge. Without clear signage, how did a pilgrim know which forest track to follow? They relied on a secret language of symbols, carved into stone or wood, visible only to those who knew what to look for. One of the most powerful was the vesica piscis, a simple yet profound shape formed by the overlap of two circles. To the uninitiated, it might look like a stonemason's practice mark or a meaningless decoration. But for a pilgrim on the hidden path, it was a sure sign of direction, a confirmation that they were on the right, if unseen, road. This symbol, often found on remote wayside crosses or the walls of isolated chapels, pointed the way forward when the main road was too dangerous to walk. Other guides were the small, humble Marian shrines tucked away in forgotten valleys. While the grand cathedrals on the main route celebrated the official doctrines of the church, these lesser-known sanctuaries often held local, deeply personal devotions. A pilgrim seeking the hidden way would know to look for a specific shrine dedicated to a particular aspect of Mary, one that the locals revered but the wider world ignored. Reaching that shrine meant you had found the network, a place where you could find safe shelter and perhaps a whispered instruction for the next leg of the journey. These covert routes through northern Spain and Portugal were a pilgrimage within a pilgrimage, a test of faith and intuition where the destination remained the same, but the journey became a far more personal and perilous secret. Long before the first stone was laid for a Christian chapel, the deep forests of Europe were already threaded with sacred paths. These were the green ways, ancient trackways that followed the old religion, the rhythms of the earth itself. In the shadowy expanse of the Black Forest in Germany or the myth-shrouded woods of Brocéliande in Brittany, the very trees seemed to remember. These routes were not designed for convenience but for power, tracing ley lines and connecting sites of natural energy revered by the Celts and their druidic wise ones. When Christianity spread across the continent, it did not simply erase these paths. Instead, it built upon them literally and figuratively. A holy well dedicated to a local spirit would be rededicated to a Christian saint. A towering, distinctive oak that had been a gathering place for generations became the site for a wayside cross. The old map was still there, just hidden beneath a new layer of names and symbols. This created a perfect camouflage for those who still held to the old ways. A person traveling to a known pagan site, a specific spring or a strangely shaped stone, could now claim they were on a Christian pilgrimage to the new chapel built beside it. Their true devotion was a secret carried in their heart and in the knowledge of the natural markers that had guided their ancestors. The journey itself was a quiet act of rebellion, a way to keep a fading faith alive under the watchful eye of a new order. How did one navigate these green ways without a written map? They read the landscape like a book. A lightning-scarred beech tree marked a crucial fork in the trail. A cluster of 3 standing stones, half hidden by ferns, indicated a safe place to rest for the night. A bubbling spring that never froze, even in the deepest winter, was both a physical and spiritual waypoint. These were not signs for everyone. To a passing monk or a royal official, they were just features of the wild. But to an initiate, they were clear as signposts, a secret language written into the earth. This system of natural navigation allowed knowledge to be passed down through generations without a single incriminating document. The forest itself was the archive, and the trail was its living text. Can you feel the tension of those journeys? The pilgrim, outwardly chanting a Christian prayer, would inwardly offer a silent blessing to the spirit of the stream they passed. Their rosary beads might be counted, but their eyes were constantly searching for the split rock or the hawthorn tree that bloomed out of season, confirming they were on the original path. This was a pilgrimage of dual meanings, where every step was both a performance for the new world and a genuine connection to the old. The green ways were perhaps the most enduring of all the hidden roads because they were not built by men but born from the land, and they refused to be forgotten. While the forests held their secrets, Europe's great rivers offered a different kind of concealment, a liquid highway that flowed in plain sight. The Rhine, the Danube, and the Rhone were not just bodies of water. They were the superhighways of their age, and for those needing to vanish, they provided the perfect escape route. A person could travel from the heart of the Alps all the way to the North Sea, or from the Mediterranean deep into Central Europe without ever setting foot on a watched road. This was the domain of the river smuggler and the discreet boatman, men who knew the currents and the shifting sandbars as well as they knew the price of silence. A fugitive or a secret pilgrim would not board a grand passenger vessel. They would instead find a place among the cargo on a trading barge laden with wine barrels or sacks of grain, their presence a hidden line item in the boatmaster's ledger. The journey was a quiet one, punctuated only by the dip of oars, the cry of waterbirds, and the distant sounds from towns they carefully bypassed. The true magic of the river highways lay in their secret landing points. These were not the bustling, official docks where customs officers collected taxes and asked difficult questions. They were unmarked clearings on a riverbank, a crumbling stone jetty behind a screen of willow trees, or a shallow beach known only to local fishermen. Under the cover of darkness or the concealing blanket of a heavy morning fog, a small boat would slip from the main current and glide to one of these spots. A figure would disembark, sometimes exchanging a few hushed words or a small coin with the boatman before melting into the landscape. The boatman himself was a crucial link in this chain. These were individuals who operated in the grey spaces between law and necessity. They might be ostensibly honest traders, but for the right price or the right cause, they would alter their route by just a few miles or pause their journey for an hour to pick up or drop off a special cargo. They were the guardians of the river's secrets, and their cooperation meant the difference between a successful, silent journey and a very public capture. Can you hear the gentle lapping of water against that hidden shore? It is the sound of 1,000 untold stories, of desperate prayers whispered on the current, of a network of movement so fluid it left no trail for hunters to follow. The rivers carried more than trade goods, they carried hope itself, flowing relentlessly toward sanctuary. High in the frozen reaches of the Alps, the very air felt thin with both danger and deliverance. For pilgrims bound for Rome, the famous Via Francigena was a road of record, a public declaration of faith that also meant enduring border guards, toll collectors, and the ever-watchful eyes of the Church. But for those whose faith was private or whose past required discretion, a different path called. A web of secret Alpine Passes offered a way through the stone heart of the mountains, a journey where the wrath of nature was a fair price to pay for freedom from the scrutiny of man. These were not roads in any true sense. They were treacherous ledges carved by avalanches, unstable scree slopes that shifted underfoot, and narrow goat tracks that skirted bottomless crevices. A single misstep could send a traveler tumbling into oblivion, and a sudden summer storm could bury a party in snow, leaving no trace for rescuers who would never come. The isolation was absolute, yet this profound solitude was the entire point. On the main routes, your name was recorded, your origin questioned, and your offerings taxed. Up here, you were anonymous, your pilgrimage a secret between you and God. You traded the certainty of bandits and bureaucracy for the raw gamble against rockfall and exposure. Two of these covert corridors held particular notoriety. The Great St. Bernard Pass, while known, had its own hidden variations, paths that veered away from the hospices and their official logs. More remote was the Splugen Pass, a brutal, winding ascent that tested the limits of human endurance. Navigating these stone labyrinths was nearly impossible for an outsider. This is where the hermits entered the story. These were not simple holy men living in isolation. They were the gatekeepers of the high passes, individuals who had chosen a life of extreme hardship and in doing so had mastered the mountain's deadly moods. A pilgrim seeking the hidden way would know to ask for them, not by name but through coded inquiry. Finding a hermit's stone hut, often tucked against a cliff face for shelter, was the first real confirmation you were on the right path. These men provided a service far beyond spiritual counsel. They were the ultimate guides, possessing an intimate, living knowledge of the mountains. They knew which slope was prone to slides after a morning of sun, which ice bridge over a crevasse could still bear a person's weight, and which narrow ledge was safest during a swirling whiteout. Their payment was often meager, a piece of dried meat or a promise of prayers, but their role was priceless. They were the human compasses for the lost, the silent guardians who made the impossible passage just barely possible. Can you feel the biting wind on that high ledge? Your heart pounds not just from the thin air, but from the dizzying freedom of being truly unseen, your journey known only to the hermit, the soaring hawk, and the stone itself. A whispered prayer in a Bohemian forest was a dangerous act of faith, for the Hussites and the Waldensians, branded as heretics for challenging the power of Rome, the official pilgrim roads were a snare. Their pilgrimage was not to a single shrine, but towards a scattered community of the like-minded, a desperate network of belief stretching from the heart of Central Europe down to the more tolerant ports of the Mediterranean. Their secret route was a masterclass in concealment, weaving itself into the fabric of legitimate travel. They moved not as fugitives through the wilderness, but as humble participants in the great medieval flow of goods and people. A Hussite preacher from Prague might join a merchant caravan heading south, his dangerous ideas hidden beneath the guise of a hired guard or a simple tinker. These trade routes, buzzing with the commerce of the Hanseatic League and Italian merchants, provided perfect cover. The constant movement and noise of a merchant train offered anonymity, a place to get lost in the crowd. But the caravan only took you so far. The true journey happened at night in the hidden spaces between towns. Survival depended on the silent protection of sympathetic nobles. A minor lord in the Rhineland or a baron in the Swiss valleys, perhaps one with his own grievances against the church's authority, would offer a crucial sanctuary. His castle was not just a fortress but a hidden way station, a secret door in the lower bailey, a forgotten chamber behind the wine cellar. These became temporary havens where a traveling heretic could rest, safe from the bishop's patrols. The noble's protection was a calculated risk, a defiance of papal authority that could cost him his lands and his life, yet it was a risk some were willing to take for a cause they believed in. The most perilous and vital moments were the clandestine meetings themselves. Under the pretense of a local pilgrimage to a nearby saint's shrine, small groups would slip away into an oak grove or descend into the cold silence of a wine cellar. Here, the real purpose of their journey was revealed. A Waldensian traveler from the Alps would produce a carefully wrapped packet, not of relics but of forbidden texts. These were handwritten copies of the Bible translated into the common tongue, a direct challenge to the Church's monopoly on the Word of God. In the flickering light of a single candle, these pages were passed from hand to calloused hand. Ideas were exchanged in hushed, fervent tones, discussions of scripture that bypassed the priest and spoke directly to the soul. The pilgrimage was the alibi, but the cellar was the cathedral. This was a faith built not of stone and stained glass, but of whispered conversations and the rustle of illegal pages, a spiritual current flowing relentlessly southward, seeking the open sea. A prayer whispered in an English manor house could now be an act of treason. When King Henry VIII broke from Rome and dissolved the monasteries, he did more than just seize land, he outlawed an entire way of life. For English Catholics, the ancient pilgrimage was suddenly stripped of its sanctity and rebranded as political rebellion. Their faith was now a crime against the state, and the familiar roads to Canterbury were watched by the king's men. In response, a new, desperate network of hidden pathways emerged, turning the quiet English countryside into a landscape of silent conspiracy. The journey often began at a smuggler's cove along the Kent or Sussex coast. Under the cover of night, a small boat would slip across the channel, carrying not contraband goods, but something far more dangerous, a Jesuit priest trained in Rome or Douai. These men were the lifeline for the outlawed faith, and smuggling them ashore was the first step in a perilous relay. From the coast, the priest would be guided inland along ancient trackways like the Pilgrim's Way. This old road, which once carried joyful pilgrims to Canterbury, now served a grimmer purpose. It was a covert highway, its course hidden by dense woodlands and rolling hills, allowing travelers to move unseen, far from the main arteries patrolled by authorities. The final and most ingenious part of this network was concealed within the very homes of the Catholic gentry, who risked everything to provide sanctuary. Behind paneled walls and under stone floors, master carpenters constructed ingenious hiding places known as priest holes. These were not simple closets, but meticulously crafted compartments, often squeezed between chimney stacks or tucked beneath staircases, their entrances virtually undetectable. A priest would live in constant tension, leading a forbidden mass in the great hall one moment, and vanishing into a dark, airless cavity the next at the first hammering on the front door. The entire household became actors in a high-stakes performance, their daily routine a careful lie designed to protect the secret at its heart. For these families, attending a covert mass was not just an act of devotion, it was a direct challenge to the crown's authority. Each whispered Latin prayer was a rejection of the king's new church, and each hidden priest they sheltered was a symbol of their enduring loyalty to Rome. The pilgrimage had been inverted, no longer a public journey to a distant shrine, but a secretive, dangerous circuit between safe houses, where the destination was not a place, but the preservation of a faith itself. This was devotion forged in fear, a quiet defiance written not in stone, but in hidden doors and silent footsteps along forgotten paths. The cold salt spray of the North Sea was a familiar spirit to the Vikings, but in time it also carried the prayers of pilgrims. Far to the north, in Trondheim, Nidaros's cathedral rose as a beacon of a new faith, its spires a stark contrast to the longships that had once ruled these waters. Yet the routes that carried the faithful to its doors were ancient, etched into the sea itself long before the first stone of the cathedral was laid. The theory suggests that the pilgrim path to Nidaros was not a new road, but a sacred map drawn over a pagan one. The Vikings, masters of the coastal labyrinth, had forged these sea lanes over generations. Their knowledge was not written on parchment, but remembered in the sound of currents, the flight patterns of seabirds, and the specific shape of coastal mountains against the sky. This was a navigational science passed from father to son, a secret language of the sea that allowed them to traverse the treacherous, island-dotted coastline of Norway with stunning precision. For a pilgrim in the Middle Ages, this inherited wisdom was a godsend. The land routes through Norway were a patchwork of rival clans and petty kings, each demanding tribute from travelers and each a potential threat. A pilgrim carrying an offering for the cathedral could easily become a target, but the sea was a different kind of territory. By taking to the water, a pilgrim could bypass these land-based dangers entirely, moving from sheltered fjord to protected island, following a highway that was invisible to those who did not know how to read it. This created a remarkable fusion of old and new devotions. A pilgrim might board a vessel steered by a sailor whose ancestors had worshipped Thor, yet the boat itself was now filled with men chanting psalms to Saint Olaf, whose relics lay within Nidaros. The pilgrim's journey was a Christian act, but its execution relied on pagan-era knowledge. They were sailing in the wake of dragon ships, their faith a new cargo on a very old vessel. How did they navigate this watery path? They used the same natural signs the Vikings had, but now interpreted through a Christian lens. A distinctive mountain peak that once guided a raider to a village for a raid might now guide a pilgrim to a small, isolated chapel built on that very shore. A hidden cove that once sheltered a longship before a surprise attack now offered safe harbor for a night of prayer. The sea route itself became a form of penance, its harshness and isolation a test of faith that mirrored the desert journeys of early saints. This was not a rejection of the past, but a quiet absorption of it. The old ways were not erased, they were baptized, their practical power harnessed for a new kind of quest. The sea remained vast and unpredictable, but for the pilgrim sailing to Nidaros, it was also a consecrated path. A liquid road to salvation paved by the very hands it had once been built to defy. Jerusalem was the final prize, the shimmering city at the end of every pilgrim's dream. Yet for centuries, the land routes to its gates were severed by warring empires and hostile kingdoms. The direct path was a death warrant. This forced a desperate ingenuity, a shadowy collaboration between the faithful and the commercially shrewd. The Italian maritime republics, Venice and Genoa, became the unlikely guardians of this covert passage. Their galleys, built for trade in silks and spices, now carried a more volatile cargo, pilgrims whose varied journey defied political borders. A pilgrim would arrive in a Venetian port, not with a public declaration of intent, but with a quiet inquiry in the right tavern, a coded negotiation for a berth that would not appear on any official manifest. The sea voyage itself was a form of purgatory, a cramped and perilous journey across the open Mediterranean, but it was a risk that offered the only hope of reaching the holy city. Once in Jerusalem, under the watchful eyes of its Muslim rulers, the pilgrim's cloak became the perfect disguise for a more dangerous trade. That humble staff and scrip, the universal symbols of a harmless seeker, were a masterstroke of deception. They granted a kind of diplomatic immunity, allowing a traveler to move through enemy territory, observing fortifications, counting soldiers, and gauging the morale of the populace. Who would suspect the intentions of a gaunt, dusty figure muttering prayers at the city gates? These pilgrim spies would memorize everything from the depth of a moat to the layout of a market square, storing vital intelligence not on parchment but in their minds. The journey home was then a race against discovery, the precious information carried back across the sea to the very powers who needed it most. Their pilgrimage was a dual act of devotion and deception, where every Hail Mary could be a cover for a tactical assessment, and every kneeling prayer at the Holy Sepulchre a chance to measure the thickness of its walls. A secret language was etched into the very stones of Europe, visible only to those who knew how to see. While the official roads used clear signs and milestones, the hidden paths relied on a silent code, a series of subtle symbols that guided the fugitive and the faithful without alerting the authorities. One of the most powerful of these was the double-barred cross of Lorraine. To a casual observer, it might appear as simple architectural decoration on a remote church or a wayside shrine. But for a Cathar fleeing through the Pyrenees or a Templar messenger on the run, that extra crossbar was a clear signal, a confirmation that they were on a safe route and that the people in this place could be trusted. It was a beacon of solidarity carved in stone. The code extended far beyond crosses. A specific arrangement of cobblestones in a village square, perhaps 3 dark stones set in a triangle amidst the lighter ones, could indicate the direction to a safe house. The carving of a particular heraldic beast on an inn sign, like a griffin or a wyvern, did more than advertise the establishment's name. It signaled that the innkeeper was part of the network, a man who would ask no difficult questions and might have a hidden room available. This was a map drawn not on parchment, but on the landscape itself, its key memorized by every guide and desperate traveler. How did this secret language remain unbroken for so long? Its power was in its ambiguity. To a royal official or a bishop's agent, these were just the random scratches and folk art of a superstitious populace. There was no incriminating document to find, no list of conspirators to confiscate. The knowledge was passed orally from one guide to the next, or from a dying heretic to their child, ensuring that the system was both resilient and invisible. Learning to read these signs was a form of initiation. A new pilgrim on the hidden road would be taught to look for the patterns, to see the meaning in the seemingly meaningless. A worn carving of a lamb with a crossed staff on a bridge abutment meant the river crossing was safe and unguarded. A faded painting of a specific saint on a barn door, one not commonly venerated in that region, could mark the next turn in the trail. This turned the journey into a constant, silent dialogue with the environment, where every wall, every crossroads, and every humble shrine held a potential message. Can you feel the tension and the hope of that moment? A traveler, alone and fearful, cresting a hill to see a familiar symbol carved into a lone standing stone. That small, weathered mark was more than just direction, it was a promise. It was a voice from the silence saying, "You are not alone, keep going, the path is still here." These silent journeys would have been impossible without a hidden army of guardians. They were the ordinary people who risked everything to keep the secret roads open, a network of courage woven into the fabric of medieval life. Consider the innkeeper in a small village just off a main pilgrim route. His establishment was a place of noise and laughter, but his true service was in the silence he offered. He knew better than to ask a traveler where they were truly from, or why they arrived after dark, or why their accent did not match their pilgrim's badge. A room would be provided, a meal served, and no record of the visit was ever kept. This quiet discretion was a form of resistance, a refusal to be an agent of the powers that hunted his guests. In the remote mountain passes, the hermits served as both spiritual and practical guides. These were not mere recluses seeking solitude, but strategic sentinels. Their small stone huts were way stations in the sky, offering a crust of bread, a sip of water, and most importantly, the knowledge locked in their minds. A hermit knew which path was washed out by the spring melt, which valley was being watched by a local lord's men, and which ford across a raging river was safest after a rain. His guidance was a matter of life and death, given freely to those who understood the subtle signs that marked his door as a place of sanctuary. Then there were the so-called smugglers, men often vilified by authority. In truth, many were expert navigators of both landscape and law. A boatman on the Rhine might transport barrels of wine by day, but under the cloak of a moonless night, he would use the same skills to ferry a family of Cathars to a hidden landing further downriver. His payment was not always coin. Sometimes it was the simple knowledge that he had upheld a higher law of human compassion. His knowledge of secret coves and unpatrolled stretches of water made him a vital link in the chain of escape. Even within the structured world of the Church, there were pockets of quiet defiance. Certain monastic orders, like the Cistercians, often built their abbeys in remote, isolated valleys. Far from the prying eyes of bishops and political intrigue, these communities sometimes operated as clandestine safe houses. A traveler arriving at their gate with a specific phrase or symbol would not be turned away to the common hostel, but would be led to a cell deep within the cloister, offered shelter, and perhaps even provided with new, plain robes to aid their disguise for the next leg of their journey. These monks understood that true faith sometimes meant protecting the hunted from the hunter. None of these guardians sought fame. Their names are lost to history, their individual acts of bravery unrecorded in any chronicle. They were the innkeepers who asked no questions, the hermits who shared their last loaf, the boatmen who navigated by conscience, and the monks who chose mercy over doctrine. Without their quiet courage, the secret roads would have been mere trails leading to dead ends and capture. They were the invisible stitches holding the fabric of this hidden world together, their humanity the one relic that never needed to be smuggled, for it was carried openly in every risk they took. The courage to walk these paths was matched only by the terror of being caught. For the traveler, the guide, even the innkeeper who offered a silent meal, discovery meant a swift and brutal end. The charge was almost always heresy, a flexible accusation that could silence any enemy of church or crown. Once accused, the legal process was a grim theater designed to produce a confession, not find the truth. Interrogation was a polite word for a ritual of pain. Standard practice involved the strappado, where a person's hands were tied behind their back and they were hoisted into the air by a rope, dislocating their shoulders with a sickening pop. The goal was not just to force an admission of guilt, but to compel the prisoner to name others, to unravel the entire hidden network with a single broken confession. A specific trial from 1321 in the south of France details the fate of a cloth merchant named Pierre Ortier. His crime was not selling fabric, but secretly guiding Cathar believers along the ghost roads of the Pyrenees. Under torture, he confessed to his role. His sentence was to be led to the public square, where a large pile of wood and straw had been assembled. He was bound to a stake and the fire was lit. His death was not a quiet affair, but a public spectacle, a warning to any who might consider following in his footsteps. His property was then confiscated by the state, a financial incentive that made hunting heretics a profitable enterprise for local authorities. But the punishment did not stop with the individual. The entire community could face reprisal. A village suspected of harboring fugitive pilgrims might find its chapel placed under interdict, a terrifying spiritual punishment where the clergy could not perform baptisms, marriages, or last rites. The villagers were effectively cut off from God's grace, their souls left in limbo as a form of collective punishment for the silence of a few. Can you feel the weight of that silence? It was not merely the absence of sound, but a heavy, conscious choice. Every creak of a floorboard in the night could be the authorities. Every stranger's glance could be an informant's gaze. The decision to offer a crust of bread to a hidden traveler was a gamble with your life and the lives of your family. The secret roads were not just paved with stone and dirt, but with this profound, daily courage in the face of a fire that sought to consume them all. Money was a dangerous companion on the hidden roads. A pilgrim on the official route might carry a purse of coins for tolls and inns, but a fugitive's wealth was a liability that could betray them in an instant. The clink of silver or the sight of a heavy purse could attract bandits or, worse, the suspicious gaze of a local official. Funding a secret journey required a different kind of currency, one of silence and ingenuity. The most sophisticated solution came from the very network that had mastered clandestine operations, the Knights Templar. Before their fall, they had pioneered a system of letters of credit. A traveler could deposit a sum of money at one Templar preceptory and receive a coded letter. This was not a simple note, but a complex document verifiable only by other Templar brothers. They could then present that letter at another preceptory, sometimes hundreds of miles away, and receive local currency, no questions asked. For a heretic or a spy, this system was a lifesaver. It meant they could travel across continents without carrying a single incriminating coin, their wealth moving invisibly through the Templars' hidden financial web, long after the order itself had been driven underground. But what happened when you were beyond the reach of any banking network, deep in a village where a strange coin was a cause for gossip? In these places, the economy reverted to barter. A pilgrim might pay for a night's shelter and a meal not with money but with a skill. A piece of fine Flemish cloth, a sliver of rare Mediterranean soap, or a service like sharpening knives or mending a pot could be offered in exchange. This silent trade left no financial records and asked no dangerous questions. The true masters of concealment, however, carried their wealth on their person, disguised as something else. A pilgrim's humble wooden staff might be carefully hollowed out, its core packed with gold florins or tightly rolled letters of introduction. The lead ampulla, a small container for holy water or oil purchased at a major shrine, was a perfect hiding place for gemstones or pearls, its sanctity deterring any casual inspection. Even the simple rosary beads could be crafted from something more valuable than wood, with every other bead made of amber or jet, a portable fortune masquerading as an object of devotion. Every transaction was a calculated risk. Paying too little might mean being turned away into the cold. Paying too much or with the wrong kind of coin could mark you as a foreigner, a spy, or a wealthy heretic worth robbing. The financial underworld of the secret pilgrimage was a high-stakes game, where survival depended not just on faith or strong legs, but on a profound understanding of how to make value disappear and reappear exactly when and where it was needed, all while leaving no trace for the world to follow. A pilgrim's diary might seem like a simple record of daily struggles, but its true message was often hidden in plain sight. Alongside notes on blistered feet and the price of bread, a traveler could encode a complete set of directions to a secret sanctuary. The phrase "saw a red hawk at noon" was not an observation of wildlife, but a critical instruction to turn at the lightning-scarred oak tree. These coded manuscripts were the fragile, flammable lifeblood of the hidden road network. Unlike a stone cross or a carved symbol, a book or a map drawn on vellum could be easily concealed in a sleeve or, if necessary, quickly fed to a fire the moment a patrol was sighted. This created a terrifying paradox. The very guide that saved your life could also become the evidence that condemned you. The most ingenious of these guides were the encrypted maps. To the untrained eye, they appeared as beautifully illustrated devotional texts or charts of the stars. But for those who knew the key, a constellation's path across the page might trace a real-world route through the Alps, with each star representing a specific hermit's hut or a safe river crossing. The lines connecting them were not celestial but terrestrial. Other maps were drawn on sheepskin so thin they could be rolled into a hollow crucifix or sewn into the lining of a pilgrim's scrip. These were not maps of kingdoms or cities, but of silence itself, charting the forgotten footpath through a lord's forest, the location of a dry cave behind a waterfall, and the farmhouse with a sympathetic family 2 days' walk from the main road. Their value was incalculable, but their existence was a constant, whispering danger. This is why the most secure knowledge was never written down at all. It lived in the memory, passed from one guide to the next through a powerful oral tradition. A father would teach his son a rhyming song that, when recited, listed the landmarks of a hidden pass in the correct order. A mother would tell her daughter a seemingly simple folk tale about a girl lost in the woods, but the story was a mnemonic device, its plot points corresponding to turns, river fords, and safe hiding spots along a local escape route. This was a living library with no physical form to burn or confiscate. The death of a guide could mean the permanent loss of a vital path, making the protection of these individuals as crucial as the protection of the routes themselves. Consider the hypothetical case of the Lombard fragment, a damaged piece of vellum discovered in an Italian archive centuries later. To most scholars, it was a merchant's account of cloth prices and weather. But when read with the understanding that every third word held meaning, it revealed a precise description of a covert Alpine crossing used by Waldensian heretics. The good wool mentioned was not a product but a code for a safe house in a specific valley. The storm that delayed us 3 days indicated the distance to the next waypoint. This was how the network breathed through these seemingly mundane documents that secretly pulsed with the directions for a desperate journey. The true map was not a single piece of parchment, but a collective memory, a scattered collection of coded diaries and whispered songs that together formed a ghostly atlas of a world that dared not speak its name aloud. A new kind of silence fell upon the hidden roads, a silence born not of secrecy but of emptiness. The Black Death did not just disrupt travel, it severed the very arteries of medieval Europe. The official pilgrim routes became avenues of death, every crowded town and bustling hostel a potential tomb. Yet the human instinct for salvation, both spiritual and physical, refused to be extinguished. It simply forged new paths born of pure desperation. The old motivations for a secret journey, heresy or political intrigue, were suddenly overshadowed by a more primal need, the need to survive. A pilgrim's goal was no longer only a distant saint's relic, but a specific healing shrine rumored to offer protection from the pestilence. The main roads, however, were now the most dangerous places to be. They connected the plague-stricken cities, and to walk them was to march through a landscape of the dead and dying. In response, a desperate new web of trails emerged, looping far around any known settlement. These were not ancient tracks remembered from pagan times, but fresh scars cut through the wilderness by families and whole villages fleeing the invisible miasma they believed carried the disease. A pilgrim seeking a shrine would now follow these ragged paths of exodus, their journey a grim pilgrimage through a world coming apart at the seams. Imagine a traveler not just watching for the king's men, but for any sign of human habitation, seeing a distant curl of smoke from a chimney not as a promise of warmth, but as a warning of potential infection. The very definition of sanctuary had changed. It was no longer just a church, but any isolated field or forest clearing far from the cough of a stranger. Some communities, completely cut off and starving, established their own secret routes not for escape but for supply. They would leave offerings of wool or crafted goods at a designated stone cross deep in the woods, retreating, and then returning later to find food left by a brave merchant or a monastery that still functioned in isolation. This silent, touchless trade was a new form of pilgrimage, a journey for bread and salt. The pilgrimage itself became a dual quest. Every prayer for spiritual cleansing was now matched by a desperate, physical plea for healing. A pilgrim carried the weight of their own potential sickness, knowing that the very hope that drove them forward could also mark them as a bringer of death to the next hidden sanctuary they encountered. This was the ultimate test of the secret road, a journey where the destination was life itself, and the path was paved with the terror of a single, fevered breath in the dark. A woman's pilgrimage was a different kind of gamble entirely. While any traveler faced bandits and harsh roads, a woman journeying alone was seen not just as a pilgrim but as prey. The world of medieval travel was a man's world, and a solitary female figure invited dangers that went beyond robbery. To reach a distant shrine, a woman had to become a master of disguise and a shrewd navigator of hidden support networks that operated far from the watchful eyes of both church and state. The most drastic strategy was to shed her identity completely. Some women cut their hair, bound their chests, and donned the rough, shapeless robes of a male pilgrim. In this borrowed skin, they could walk with a less fearful stride, their voice lowered, their gaze fixed on the ground to avoid conversation. a woman disguised as a young monk or a simple laborer could blend into the river of travelers, her true self a secret guarded by wool and willpower. It was a desperate act, for discovery could lead to accusations of witchcraft or immorality, but the freedom to move without constant fear made the risk worth taking. For those who could not or would not take on a male identity, there was another way, a hidden geography of female sanctuary. Scattered across Europe were communities of beguines, women who lived religious lives of prayer and good works but were not bound by permanent vows or cloister. Their courtyards and houses became crucial way stations. A female pilgrim arriving at a beguinage would find a space governed by women, a place where her story was understood without needing to be fully explained. Here she could rest, recover, and receive guidance for the next leg of her journey, all under a roof that offered protection from the predatory dangers of the open road. These communities formed a chain of safe houses, a silent sisterhood that enabled passage for those with no other recourse. Similarly, certain convents played a dual role. While officially part of the church, many were located in remote areas and were populated by women with deep local knowledge and their own private sympathies. A convent known for its healing herbs or its devotion to a particular female saint might discreetly offer shelter to a pilgrim whose journey was too sensitive for the public hostels. She would be brought in through a side gate, her presence unrecorded in the guest ledger, given a pallet in a quiet cell, and then sent on her way at dawn with provisions and a whispered blessing. This network of women helping women was the true backbone of the feminine pilgrimage. It was a system built on quiet understanding and mutual aid, where a shared glance or a carefully chosen word could unlock a door to safety. Their journeys were acts of profound courage, a quiet rebellion against the constraints of their world, each step a testament to a faith that demanded they risk everything just for the chance to kneel at a distant altar. Robin Hood was more than a man, he was a symptom of a hidden geography. The greenwood he ruled was not a random wilderness, but a specific network of forgotten tracks and hiding places, the same kind of secret routes that crisscrossed Europe. His legend of stealing from the rich to give to the poor perfectly mirrors the real-world economy of the clandestine pilgrimage, where guides and safe house operators risked everything for no payment but a higher cause. The merry men were not just bandits, they were a fictional representation of that entire hidden support system, the innkeepers, the boatmen, the hermits, all those who sustained travelers outside the law. Sherwood Forest itself functioned like a massive, natural version of the covert Alpine Passes or the river smugglers' landing, a zone where the authority of the Sheriff of Nottingham, much like a king's agent or a bishop's inquisitor, simply dissolved at the tree line. The ballads that celebrated his exploits were a way for common people to process and celebrate the reality of these secret networks that they knew, on some level, were operating all around them. But the connection goes deeper than just a clever outlaw. Consider the strange and compelling figures known as the outlaw saints. Saint Gynfort was paradoxically a greyhound. The legend tells of a faithful dog wrongly slain by his master, who then buried him in a well in the forests of France. Local peasants, completely outside of church approval, began visiting the site as a shrine, seeking the dog's intercession for the protection of their own children. The church repeatedly tried to suppress this cult, but for generations people secretly pilgrimaged to this forbidden spot, using hidden forest paths to reach it. This was a folk saint, a figure of local defiance, whose very existence depended on the same covert geography that protected heretics. Another figure, Saint Wilgefortes, was a bearded female saint who, according to legend, prayed to be made ugly to avoid a forced marriage and was crucified. Her unusual image became a symbol for the oppressed and the desperate, particularly women. Those seeking escape from unbearable situations, much like the female pilgrims traveling in disguise, would seek out her remote shrines, often located away from main towns, following whispered directions. These saints were not officially sanctioned heroes, they were folk responses to hardship, and their veneration was a secret pilgrimage that authorities could never fully control. The legends of Robin Hood and the cults of the outlaw saints are two sides of the same ancient coin. One is a romantic, secular memory of the secret road's protectors, the other a spiritual testament to its travelers. They are the echoes in our stories of a time when the landscape itself held a hidden map, and the greatest acts of faith and freedom happened not on the grand highways, but in the quiet, desperate shadows just beyond them. These silent journeys left deep footprints on the land, if you know where to look. Modern archaeologists have become the new interpreters of these hidden routes, searching for the physical proof of faith and flight. They are not looking for grand monuments, but for subtle scars on the earth itself. One of the most telling signs is a sunken track known as a holloway. These are not mere paths, but trenches worn deep into the bedrock by generations of secret feet. Over centuries, the constant passage of travelers, combined with rainwater runoff, carved these lanes sometimes several meters below the surrounding land. Walking through a holloway feels like moving through a secret tunnel made of soil and roots, a tangible echo of the countless souls who sought the cover of the earth itself. Finding the ruins of a forgotten chapel is another powerful clue. These are not the grand cathedrals on the official maps, but small, solitary structures tucked away in a remote valley or perched on a windswept hill far from any major settlement. Why build a place of worship in such an inconvenient, isolated location? The answer often points to a secret waypoint, a sanctuary for those who could not risk the busy churches in town. The artifacts found at these sites tell a compelling story. A pilgrim's badge, a small lead or tin token purchased at a major shrine like Canterbury or Santiago, was meant to be sewn onto a hat or cloak as public proof of a completed journey. But when archaeologists find these badges in an isolated cave or buried near the foundation of a remote hermit's hut, it suggests a different narrative. The pilgrim never made it to the crowded official shrine or chose not to. Instead, their journey ended or was validated at this hidden altar. Their proof of devotion was a secret they took to their grave. Today, technology is pulling these ghost roads into the light. LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, is a revolutionary tool. It uses laser pulses fired from an aircraft to map the ground surface, digitally stripping away the forest canopy and modern infrastructure to reveal the bare earth beneath. What appears to the naked eye as an unbroken woodland becomes, under LiDAR's gaze, a crisscrossing web of ancient holloways, the faint foundations of lost chapels, and the orderly lines of abandoned medieval field systems that often bordered these old tracks. It is like gaining X-ray vision into the past, allowing us to see the hidden geography that guided the desperate and the devout. These are not just lines on a map, but the recovered footprints of a hidden world, a silent testimony written into the very soil. Those ghost roads are no longer silent. Today, the very paths once trodden by heretics and fugitives are being cleared by a new generation of seekers, their modern hiking boots tracing the indentations of ancient fear and faith. This is not merely a historical curiosity, but a living revival, a reclamation of landscapes haunted by memory. Organizations like the Via Francigena Collective in Italy or the Friends of the Old Way in Britain are not just mapping trails. They are performing acts of archaeological healing, piecing together fragmented routes from old manuscripts, local folklore, and the stubborn physical evidence of holloways and forgotten shrines. They work to re-signpost the wilderness, not with the official seals of kings, but with the simple, humble markers that guide a pilgrim's heart. Those who walk these reborn paths often speak of an uncanny sensation, a feeling that they are not alone on their journey. It is a palpable atmosphere that seems to cling to certain stretches of the trail, a sudden chill in a sunlit forest glade or an overwhelming sense of peace in a high, windswept pass. This is the echo of centuries of desperate prayers and silent footsteps, a history soaked into the soil that modern pilgrims, often without any specific religious intent, find themselves intuitively sensing. The journey itself becomes the teacher, a corporate lawyer from a bustling city walking the Cathar Trail through the Pyrenees might find the relentless physical challenge stripping away layers of stress and ambition, leaving behind a raw, more authentic self. A nurse tracing the hidden coastal caminos of northern Spain might find the rhythm of the sea and the solitude opening a space for grief or clarity that her daily life never permitted. The transformation reported is rarely about a destination, but about the arduous, beautiful process of the walk. The path, with its ancient legacy of risk and redemption, seems to demand a reckoning, inviting those who walk it to shed their own burdens just as the travelers of old shed their identities. This modern pilgrimage is a bridge across time, where the search for meaning in a noisy world finds a profound answer in the enduring silence of these old, secret ways. The greatest treasure carried on these roads was not gold but silence. We are left with a landscape of ghosts and questions that refuse to be answered. The legendary wealth of the Knights Templar, for instance, did not simply vanish. It dissolved into the landscape, and its final resting place remains one of history's most compelling puzzles. Did it fund a secret war from a Scottish stronghold? Was it used to establish a new order in Portugal, rebranded and safe from the French king's reach? Or does it still lie in a sealed chamber beneath a French village, or deep within a cave network in the Swiss Alps? Its location died with the last treasurer who knew the combination to a lock that has long since rusted shut. Every theory is plausible, yet none are proven, leaving us with the haunting image of a fortune in gold, silver, and perhaps even religious relics from Jerusalem, waiting in the dark for a key that no longer exists. Along the Cathar ghost roads through the Pyrenees, another kind of treasure haunts the imagination. When Montségur fell, the survivors fled with more than their lives. They carried their most sacred knowledge, their gospels, and their interpretations of faith, texts that the Church was determined to burn out of existence. Were these heretical scriptures hidden in a sealed ossuary and walled up in a forgotten cave? Could they be buried in a lead-lined chest beneath the floor of a remote farmhouse, its location passed down in whispers through generations until the last person who knew the story took it to their grave? The possibility that these profound challenges to medieval orthodoxy still exist, preserved by the cold, dry mountain air, is a siren call for historians and treasure hunters alike. The true loss, however, may be the knowledge that died with the last guardians. The hermit who knew the safe passage across a crumbling ledge, the boatman who remembered the pattern of the currents to a hidden cove, the innkeeper's wife who could recognize a fugitive by the subtle stitching on their cloak. These people were the living libraries of the hidden world. When they passed, entire routes simply faded from memory, their subtle markers overgrown by forest or weathered into meaningless stone. What final secrets did they carry? The location of a final Templar preceptory, the identity of a noble family that secretly funded the heretical networks for generations, the true purpose of a symbol we can now only guess at. Their silence is a permanent one. These enigmas are the true legacy of the secret roads. They remind us that history is not a closed book, but a story with missing pages, and that the most profound truths are often those that were too dangerous to ever write down. This invisible web of secret roads reveals a profound truth about the human spirit. The medieval world, for all its rigid structures of faith and power, was crisscrossed by these rivers of quiet defiance. It was a system built on equal parts faith and fear, a testament to a devotion so powerful it would risk fire and sword just for the chance to kneel in a hidden cellar or reach a sanctuary beyond the reach of kings. The courage did not belong only to the pilgrims themselves, but to the innkeepers who mastered the art of silence, the boatmen who navigated by conscience, and the hermits who shared their last crust of bread on a frozen pass. They were the guardians of the map, the ones who ensured that the flame of belief, however unorthodox, was never fully extinguished. Their collective story is one of breathtaking resilience, a reminder that the most powerful journeys are often the ones that leave no trace in the official record. They walked not for glory, but for the simple, profound right to seek the divine on their own terms. So the next time you walk a quiet country lane or a forest path, pause for a moment. Feel the weight of the centuries under your feet. What hidden histories lie beneath the paths you walk every day? Share your thoughts on the most intriguing secret route in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe for more journeys into the shadows of history.